Meeting to order, and the first item on the agenda, finally, is the project information worksheet. Mr. Adele?
Brian Adele, here discussing the project information worksheet. Just as a quick background, project information worksheet is currently required for new construction projects. Any project that the funding is based on per pupil grant for new construction is what's required for the project information worksheet, and also modernization projects if they have the high performance grant incentive. The purpose of the PIW was to analyze the pupil grant eligibility, the relationship between that and the bid climate, also to further bond accountability, and to evaluate the high performance incentive grant. At the January 2012 board, OPSC was directed to have a discussion of the implementation committee to talk about the worksheet, specifically to talk about ways to streamline the entire process, the worksheet itself, and also to look at expanding it to other programs beyond just new construction-based programs. So we talked about it from July to November, about how to expand it to other programs. And when we looked at it, let me back up. As far as streamlining it, what we looked at was it's filled out online. So what can OPSC autofill and auto-populate and auto-sum? So we went through line by line, talked to the programmers, and figured out what could be done. So that's already implemented, which we were told does cut down the time to fill it out. We also looked at there's currently required at 3 stages of the construction process, which is when the district receives funds, when the funds are released with the Form 5005. Then a year later, when the first expenditure report comes due, they update the PIW. And then finally, when the project is 100% complete, as indicated on the expenditure review. So we looked at, could one of those be eliminated, and we looked at the pros and cons of that. And because all of those reporting requirements, those stages, are built into the regulations, that would require reg change and thus a board action. So that would be part of, if it went back to the board, something that would have to be looked at. But we just looked at the pros and cons. And as far as expanding it to the modernization program, most of the worksheet would work. There's 4 or 5 pages, 3 or 4 pages. One is for HPI, would work for modernization, but the key page that really wouldn't work is where you capture the actual project scope. Currently, new construction just asks what kind of building type is it, permanent, modular, or portable, and then asks what's the square footage. Because if you're building it to feel that compliant, it's pretty much like for like, depending on square footage. It also asks for things about playgrounds, some of the other infrastructure that were built into the new school. But because of the way the modernization projects work, that really wouldn't be applicable. We know, hearing from stakeholders, that modernization projects vary. Districts will completely tear down a classroom and rebuild it. That would be eligible for modernization project. Or they could go through a school and replace 80% of the roofs and the HVACs for all of the buildings. So if the district reported 80% of the classrooms had modernization work, that wouldn't be a true representation of. So people might assume that 80% of the school is then modernized, which is inaccurate. So what we tried to do was say, what would represent a good snapshot or a picture of what that modernization project actually did? So if we look at page 3, this was our first attempt. It was later revised, as you'll see, but this was our first attempt. And we were trying to say, what would give a real in-depth snapshot of what that project did? So we looked at types of facilities, number of buildings. We wanted to know for each room, for each building, what work was done. And in the middle there, with some of the yellow columns, that was an attempt to capture, if the building was replaced, tell us what you were doing and what was the motive for that. Was it to improve the layout of the school, or the building was just so old it didn't make sense to even touch it. Just go ahead and tear it down and build a new one. We received a lot of concerns about the amount of time it would take to fill this out and the accuracy of it, because not everyone at the district would immediately have all of the answers. So it would be a lot of research in order to be really accurate and in-depth. So based on those concerns, we revised it, and page 4 reflects that. It's much more streamlined, and rather than trying to capture individual building work, we focused it more on scope. For example, if roofing or site infrastructure was done, just the hard costs, not all the soft costs, but just the hard costs, how much was spent for that type of work. And this would be captured, it says first submittal and second submittal. That's assuming that the number of submittals was going to be reduced from 3 to 2. So that could be revised if the number of submittals wasn't going to be reduced. And then finally, at the bottom right, it captures total square foot modernized all facilities. So that's where we potentially would be able to compare the type of work and the hard costs with the actual square foot that was modernized. Not to say that if a certain 50,000 square foot was modernized, that it was completely modernized, but just kind of give a scope or a relative from one project to the next to see, other than just dollar amount, how much was being done and how far along districts are in their modernization of projects. And then at the bottom right, total modernization cost per square foot, that would just be simple division of dividing the total hard costs, the total cost of the project, including the soft costs, by whatever square footage amounts were entered in the above box. So that's where we were at with the discussion at the implementation committee, and then the board directed that this discussion be moved then to the subcommittee. So if you have any questions, thank you.
Any comments at all?
Yes, thank you. I do. I've been involved with Brian and OPSC and all the people many of the people in this room discussing the PIW for a couple of years, and I was actually involved in some of the early work on it. As I think most people know, I'm a strong advocate of data collection for the state, and I think it's extremely important that we have good data to inform public policy. The PIW is a useful tool. I've used it. It's available on the Bond Accountability website. Every single PIW that has been submitted to OPSC provides us with the only total project cost information that we have in the state. Because of the way that districts report using the required 5006 expenditure reports, they often only report costs officially to the state that reflect their matching share. So if they received $10 million from the state, they report $10 million on there to show that they've met their match, whereas the actual project cost may be significantly different than that. And the PIW is the only information that provides the actual total project cost that it takes to build a school in California. And so it's extremely important for that reason. It also provides good information about the scope of the project in terms of the types of facilities built, the number of classrooms, etc. But that said, there are a number of issues with the current PIW for new construction that need to be addressed in order to make it more effective for the state and to simplify the process of filling out the form for districts, including the bid climate section is, to be just honest, it's not very usable in terms of the data that is collected and the ability to isolate data that might be useful in understanding what the bid climate is. It's just hard to get at, and the questions are not very helpful getting there. The high performance section also needs a lot of work. We're asking questions that frankly there are no answers for, and it's not good data. It doesn't give us data that's useful or helpful in understanding whether we're meeting our high performance goals. I do strongly support expanding the PIW to include modernization, so we begin to have that total project cost for modernization, so we know what we've done as a state. But it should be done really carefully to avoid some of the issues that we have in the new construction side. The modernization project information is critical, but we need to keep the level of detail fairly high so districts can fill it out. A lot of what goes on at districts is this is not necessarily filled out by the project manager or the facilities person always. Often it's a clerk or someone in accounting who might be filling it out, so we need to kind of respect the level of simplicity. Yes.
If I may interrupt there, why not? I mean, I've been to enough of these schools to know when they get a lot of money, they're actually bidding it out, they're trying to get their supplies, they have someone who's very competent either overseeing it or they go to an outside agency who does that. Someone is doing a heck of a lot more detail than any of the stuff we're asking for. I mean, if it gets passed on to the clerk to fill out the form, then that's probably a problem. That should be part of, if I'm on the school board, I'm going to want to have that information too to make sure that there's different levels of oversight, and we do have a function to be oversight and to make sure that we're accountable to taxpayers who are flipping the money for this, who's paying the bill. So I'm just wondering, why would a clerk do this if they don't respect it? Yes. But if they think it's part of the system that you have to do, just like all the rest of your bids, just like going to the right vendors for my project, my right architect, you're not going to sit there and just...
Good point. No, I don't understand because I've heard this a lot of what happens in school districts, or maybe if there's any districts here, they can kind of share that with you. But I agree. I think it would be best for us to have the person with the greatest knowledge of the project filling out the form so that we have the best information. Totally agree. Just to finish up, I do think that we should not adopt the modernization PIW at this time prior to a new bond. It would probably be best to implement this as part of a new bond package. It would be difficult for us to go to districts, I think, at this time and say, gee, we're out of money, but here, fill out another 3-page form for us. And so I think that's what I would support. And I would recommend that we continue to work with stakeholders at the IMP committee to just finish refining the form that we have. I've looked at all of the other PIW-type forms that are used throughout the United States. This is by far the most complicated one. We have one of the most complicated programs and the biggest program in the nation also. So most of the forms are 1 to 2 pages. But again, I strongly support it, but I think it would be important for us to wait till we have a new bond to make that a part of our new requirements for modernization. Thank you.
I think instead of taking comments after, I'd like to take comment, if there are any public comments now, and then we can ask our questions based on the information you provided as well as public comments. So if you'd like to come up, and if anyone has any comments to make, and then we can delve into the conversation a little bit more.
Good morning. I'm Ron Furman, representing WLC Architects and District Clients. There isn't a district, other than maybe a big district, that fills out this form. They just don't have the information or have access to it and know enough about the bid and how the bid is put together. I hate to break your bubble.
So who is
the architect or the construction manager are generally the people who build these houses.
So they can't direct you to do that? If I'm the school board and I'm hiring you to do a project?
Absolutely.
Then why don't I have them do that?
Absolutely. Did you fund it?
Yes, with the bigger check we did.
I don't remember that. I missed that part. I've been following this program since 1990.
Well, part of and I'm not trying to play devil's advocate here, but one of my jobs as a representative for my district is to make sure that we spend taxpayer dollars in an efficient manner. And I have to report out to go out and do this. And all of you in this room who say, put a new bond in 2014 because they're out of money, if I think they'll sell it, then we all have a problem. So if we can't say we have these projects, we're efficient, we were doing good, what's going to be thrown back at me is, the worst extreme case of a $350 or $700 million high school or something like that. You didn't spend our money wisely. So why are you coming after more money? So this is beneficial for everybody, even though it's a little more work. If I'm the school board, I'm going to say my architect, my project engineer, somebody fill this out for me. And you're going to tell me out of the millions of dollars we give, if you want to get paid extra to fill out a 3-page form online?
Tell me, it takes time. And perhaps I should start out a little bit different. I agree with Bill in his total assessment, everything that he said about bid climate, HPI, and modernization program. However, you are not going to be able to capture, and I agree with you, sir, we should know where every dollar is being spent on what type of projects, what type of materials, because it will help us. It'll do you, other than the final PIW, any interim ones do you no good. They don't help with the bid climate, like Bill said, because they either lead or lag. It's like predicting to buy a house. When is the market the lowest, and when do you want to sell it at the highest? You never know.
So you agree we need data. You don't think the interim report is necessary.
And that's my point, because there's scope changes,
Right.
there are changes to materials, there's value unengineering that takes place where they take things out of a project. So you're reporting these things in the interim, and they don't end up in the actual cost of the project. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't think there's anybody sitting in this room or any taxpayer out there that wouldn't want to make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck and that we're spending the money wisely in how we're doing it.
So,
I'm sure John has a lot more experience building school buildings. I mean, I built a couple of city halls and things like that for my city, but we had the architect come in or designer and say, this is your budget. We had to pick some things, tweak it around. We start off with a budget. It never ended up that way because, like you said, there's change orders when it's done. But at least, we could point out how much it costs per square foot and what material, all that stuff's there.
Absolutely.
And the architect and the design consultant, they're making pretty good dollars. They should be able to fill out some kind of information that we could capture. We could go back and say it costs us X amount of dollars per square foot for a room, or for modernization, how much it costs me for a new roof, what time period should you have. I mean, this is important stuff, and I don't know what's the best way, whether this is the perfect form or not, but that data, I think, is very important for all of us.
I agree with everything you said. My point would be, do one at the end. When the project is finished, you have accurate costs, accurate data. It'll help you with bound accountability and how the money was spent. It'll capture everything that Bill says about additional funds beyond what the reported requirements are. But to do them interim, trust me, it's a waste of time.
So are there any other comments from anybody before we get into more discussion?
I had just a question though, Ron. If you've been doing these over time, have the auto-populating pieces improved the process?
Absolutely. It's helped, and maybe Lyle, because I think LA, doesn't LA do some of their own?
And are there areas that could benefit by that type of auto-populating as well?
I think
have we not captured all of that?
No, I think they've done a real good job on that. But when you get down to the amount of plastics or coverings on the windows and stuff like that, I don't think Joe Q. Public cares.
Are we into that
Well,
level
some of that stuff is in there, yeah.
Because we don't have the actual...
Some of that stuff, it gets really drilled down into the detail. Some of the drills in, right?
Well, right now our discussion is about modernization. And I know right now there's been a lot of focus on, refining the new construction, but I think the focus of this discussion is explicitly about modernization.
Yeah, right. So maybe we can hear from Lyle on his comments.
Good morning. First of all, I'd like to say that it's extremely difficult to hear back there. I don't know if the microphones just aren't working or what, but...
These aren't
recording microphones.
Well, hello. So I'll try to talk louder. I just want to say that one of the problems with the forum all along has been that school districts don't buy into it. And the reason they don't buy into it is because it has never served the purposes for which it was supposedly established. In other words, bond accountability has never really been shown as a result of the information. Bidding climate, of course, as Bill said, just didn't work, and other situations. So I agree with Bill and I agree with Ron. The information is a great thing, and information flow from school districts to the state is absolutely essential for good bond accountability, good planning, etc. The forum has just never accomplished those goals, and I think that's one of the problems that you've had in trying to get. Assemblymember Hagman said, the form should be filled out by someone that knows the project, knows what they're doing, blah blah blah. It never is. It's filled out by kind of the end of the line. The last person in the line kind of fills it out because nobody else sees the essentialness of it. And so that's a problem. And you look at this form, the one that's proposed for the modernization program, and again, it has information that is going to be really difficult to provide because it's hard to understand exactly what is being asked. Okay? And when you're doing a modernization program, let's just say that what you did was replace the HVAC system, okay, in the whole school, or maybe 2/3 of school. And then you look down here and you say total square feet modernized. Well, did you modernize the school by replacing the HVAC system? And the answer is no, you didn't. So, and then you look at the rest of it and try to figure out, okay, what does it mean? How do you fill it out in a manner that has importance and validity? And it's just impossible to do. And that's why there's so much pushback on this form. if you can show how it's being used, in other words, is it being used for bond accountability? Did it actually work in that purpose? Did you show a report that came to the state allocation board that accomplished that goal? If the answer is yes, I'll tell you, every school district in the state will jump right on board because everybody wants bond accountability. And again, Assemblymember Hagman, when you're talking to a board, this is not the form you're going to be using. You're not going to take this form to any board that I'm familiar with anyway and say this is the information that you're going to use to understand what we've done. The board wants either a lot more or a lot less.
Less than this. I think I would like to have, if I'm going to sit on the board, I would at least have to, like, the starting out bid. We're going to do this to the school. It's going to cost, $25,000 for this HVAC system. And then at the end of the job, when you report out that it's done, and say, well, it really only cost us $22,000, that's a good thing. I mean, I'm looking at these categories: building replacement, replacing building, hazardous material abatement. I mean, these are broad categories, and like beginning bid and end bid, it's pretty good. But if you just say I spent building replacement $10 million, and we don't have the number of buildings or the square foot of buildings, how do you ever calculate out to have some kind of cost per square foot?
Oh, the board's going to want a lot more information than
exactly.
this. It's just that it's not going to be in this kind of a format. That's the only problem that I really see in that regard. So if somehow or other you can marry the two and make it a good form that works for school districts, that accomplishes other goals, accomplishes your own goals, I think you'd find a lot more support for the form, a lot more help in making it work properly. I agree the form is necessary. Information is a good thing. We just want to see it done right.
I think there's validity to the issue of the form being utilized for the purpose that it was put into place for. And having been here when that happened and been through, those were some rough times. And it was really put into place to either determine whether we would increase the program by 6% or not.
Right.
It has never, to my knowledge, been used for that purpose. If I'm wrong, correct me. I don't remember that we ever used it for that purpose. Now, the other areas we, I think, along the way expanded to say, yes, we would use it for these purposes as well. And so that's the faith, I think, with the community of users, is that that's the issue that we put this into place for. It has expanded to other uses. It's expanding more as we talk about it. Information is good. It also it was part of the system midway through a bond program, and we put this into place quite a few years into the bond program. And so it wasn't part of the institutional part of this program, and it took a shift, I think, by many parties to accept that. I think going forward, as we look at this and as we look at the modernization component of it, I know there's a recommendation to maybe not do that until we have a new bond program, that if we put this on the front side of the program, that it's part of the program and not an afterthought or an after product of the program, that it's going to be much more effective. And I'm not so sure that the effectiveness of it is at the end. And that's something that probably can be discussed here. And also the linkage between what we're asking for in the form and what we fund is another component of it. We have a program that has a philosophy of it's per ADA, particularly in modernization, it's per ADA, and then you take those fundings and it is your local decisions about what you do, whether you do the HVAC, whether you do educational program. It's your decision on that. And yet we're asking for information about what did you do. And I think that in keeping faith with the bond program and everyone is, what is the purpose of that information if we have a philosophy of a system that says it's local control? I think it needs to have stronger linkages that way, and that will go further to bring all parties along on what is important to have, important data to make policy decisions.
I especially wanted to jump on that bandwagon about trying to apply this to the end of a program. Just quite frankly doesn't make any sense, not the least of which is by the time this would actually be implemented and in place through regulations, your money's going to be gone and you'd be retroactively applying it to projects. So thank you very much.
Are there any other comments?
I have a question for staff. So what amount of data do we have for the modernization dollars?
The only data we provide is the outcomes of the dollars that we put out for the project.
So we just have number of projects and number of dollars.
Number of dollars awarded, and there's no other data
For how many
being captured.
millions of dollars?
So far, $32 billion have been dispensed to the program.
Okay.
And there's plenty of opportunity. There's over $600 million in projects that haven't been awarded funds at this point in time. And at the allocations of bond sales coming out, it may not be for another 2 or 3 cycles, maybe even a couple of years, 3 years before we even have all the funds actually dispensed in a portion. So there are plenty of opportunities.
Thank you.
Tom?
Good morning.
Can I interrupt Tom for 1 second? We're talking about this form, but I kind of want to put the whole context, and maybe you could kind of comply with that too, or comment on that. We have 39. It's going to be. We all have Prop 39 bills. Governor's got a proposal. We got proposals. I got a proposal. We all have proposals. But eventually, money's coming to the school districts. One way or the other, money's coming out. Part of that is upkeep and record keeping as well. Part of that's going to be taking an energy audit and then reporting out, again, just kind of what this is, where those bond monies being spent. And I saw the governor's 52-page thing, and he has little, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suggestions, those type of things. But there's going to be a database component to that. There's also, we're asking for data, okay? Eventually, I'd like to get one comment, why don't we have a statewide system that says, this is my canvas, every time I get money in, we got to update, so when you come back to us and say, we need to put another bond out, I know how much money we should pay out for a bond, or where that money's going, or if we want to do reports. Most other states have it. Our community college system has it. I know we got way too many school districts, but is this the time to start that now with the Prop 39 dollars? I keep hearing wait till next bond. I mean, the way this governor's talking, there won't be a next bond. Do you want to reinvent this wheel or not? Those type of things. But if we're ever going to put a bond, it's going to have to come up next year. Do we want to start this with Prop 39? Is there, instead of having pieces here for Prop 39, a little bit for new construction, a little bit for something else, do we want to try to use some of those resources to build one, I guess, better system? One complete capture it all type system, because I know they put that into all our bills on the assembly side. So all those bills got amended with that language, and this would be for all that data, not just energy efficiency data. So while you're coming up here, you might as well get comments on that too, I guess.
Thank you, Tom Duffy, for the CAPS organization. And Mr. Hagman, in a conversation with Curtis in your office a couple of months ago, in discussion reference along the lines of your comments, we had suggested to him that maybe Prop 39 could be a vehicle for a pilot of trying to say, what is it that we can really assess? Because it is money that hasn't been allocated yet, and the program hasn't been designed yet. So as we design the program, let's also design the means of assessing what it is that we're going to be doing with that program. And maybe that is taking a snapshot of the building today for energy purposes, whether it's glazing, whether it's lighting, whether it's air conditioning, that kind of thing. But
and just to comment, we expanded that concept to actually include life of building and those type of other things, not just energy too. And that was by the committee's desire to add all these different things as well into it. So they actually amended the smaller scope into a larger scope of data collection. So I'm not sure what's going to get signed into law or not, but it's going that way for the system. So I'm wondering, as we talk about this one snapshot for modernization or for new construction, or we use different bond funds for it, but it's all construction work and trying to help bring up our schools, site in different ways. What is better to do? Multiple different programs, or to have one standardized system, I guess?
And I would imagine that if we went forward, say, to 2000 and...
Tom, can you speak up just a tiny bit?
Sure.
I'm not sure Lyle can hear you.
If we were to go into 2015 and maybe we have a bond and we have Prop 39, we would want to make sure that there's a recognition that there are two funding sources, and what do school districts add to either of those funding sources as well. So we'd be really looking at 3 funding sources. But my comments, not to belabor several things that have been said, I think that I heard the latter part of what Mr. Savage was talking about. I came a little after he came. But he and I have had discussions about this over the last year or more. A bit of history. We proposed that this kind of work be done, to look at, as you said, Ms. Moore, what is it that we can do to demonstrate the cost of building schools? Because what was in the prior bond, 1D basically said that the board could provide an increase based upon information. And there was a particular effort that was done that was seen as vectoring toward constraining dollars rather than expanding dollars. And I won't go into that, but it's the now infamous Macias report. After that, we said, why don't we look at working with school districts and state agencies, put together collaboratively a document to make an assessment. And so the CASH organization suggested that. We organized meetings. We had agents, including the executive officer at the time from OPSC and others. And we created a document collaboratively. We actually went into the field into 3 locations, 2 school districts and 1 county office, to say, give us your feedback about this. We collected a lot of feedback. There was a disconnect at some point in time, and that disconnect basically had the document go in one direction, which was not the direction we thought it should go. And therefore, we didn't support what happened after that. I say that to you for reasons of, 1, it was history. 2, you've heard a report from our colleague over at Berkeley, Jeff Vincent, who's talked about a trust factor. That trust factor is real. And I just told you about something that was a demonstration of where the lack of trust, some of the lack of trust, I think, began. And I'm suggesting that following what Mr. Savage suggested, that there be a collaborative approach using stakeholders, looking at it prospectively. And it could be done in a variety of ways, and I know, Mr. Hagman, you have very strong feelings about this. But if it were to be done, that and building a new school is very different than going in and modernizing an existing school, fixing a school, certainly. But if part of this new program within the new bond and possibly within Prop 39 would be making an assessment of the building, and then that assessment of the building being compared to what is done after that building has been retrofitted, modernized, rehabilitated, whatever it may be, but that there would be a baseline that's a real baseline that is identified, and then the changes identified and the cost of those changes. If we were to begin today, what are we going to compare that to? We've not done this before. The modern program has been around since 1982, and we've not done anything except go in and, I think, do some very good things in schools. Many of us in this room know what that program has been and know what we can do and know the shortcomings of that program. Let's use that knowledge of the people that are in the field today. I know Mr. Pregman's comments about who is doing this. Well, in school districts, architects get involved, CMs, construction managers get involved, the school district personnel themselves get involved if they have knowledge. And of course, we've talked about this, Ms. Buchanan, about the various levels of expertise as well as the capacities in school districts today because of the diversity in California. So what I'm suggesting, without carrying on too long here, is that it be prospective, but that there be a baseline identified, very much like I think would be suggested for Prop 39 for older buildings, and then make a determination of what those changes were and what those costs were, so we begin to build a database for the future.
So could you please elaborate for me on what you would have schools do to give us an assessment of their current buildings?
If it were to be for modernization, not for Prop 39?
Well, either one.
Either one. Well, just with Prop 39, if we've talked...
well, let's talk about modernization, because that's what's before us right now. So you're saying all schools should all districts should give us an assessment of their buildings. What will go into that and what will be reported?
The district in what I'm thinking is that the district would, through its architects, structural engineers, and others, make an assessment of what that building is at in today's...
What would that include?
That would include lighting, it would include painting, it would include is there lead, all of the things that...
Life cycle cost?
Life cycle cost, if we have some determination really in what that is.
Current condition.
Current condition.
So are you going to say the lights are X years old, or what kind they are, or when was the last time it was painted, or how many electrical outlets you have, or how many, what would you include in that?
Well, all of those things
relative to what is it that I'm trying to do within that building, within those classrooms. Because some of those classrooms, and you've heard it from Mr. Vincent, you've heard it from others, some of those classrooms may need to be changed significantly. In my experience in using the modernization program in the 80s and the 90s anyway, we didn't have enough electrical outlets because the buildings were built in the 1930s or the 1940s.
So you're recommending that we have more information than this?
Well, the information that the district would utilize to make its determination of what it does may not necessarily be filed with the state of California.
Is that similar, I mean, I'm sorry, I talked about when the Department of Defense was before us on the matching share, which still is an issue for California that we will probably need to be looking at as well. But when they were before us, their approach, the federal government's approach to these projects was, okay, what is wrong or what is deficient in these buildings, both educationally and infrastructure-wise? And those were enumerated, they were prioritized, and they moved their program for that bottom dollar. Is that what you're talking about, as opposed to a per ADA program where we've historically said, here's your money, do what you can? Are you saying an approach that says, here's the building deficiencies, this is what we need to be funding?
That would be the ideal, and we have certainly talked about that kind of thing in the past, and I'm always told that's not going to happen, we don't have enough money for that. But if as the educational leader in a school district, I'm trying to create the best environment for learning, I've got to look at those things. Maybe they don't get funded through the state program. Maybe what I provide to the state is something short of that, but I'm certainly going to want to look as deeply as I can in what changes I need to make in that building, and probably have to spend more than the state's going to provide to me to meet those, or to be able to winnow back and say what are the basics. So this
is a condition and assessment.
Yes,
that's what they're called.
Can I make a comment? Because I think a way to start, and the point that Tom made is actually good, which is the PIW for modernization says, here, I modernized this building, but there's no baseline that says, what is this building before you start? I'm not necessarily, I'm a big fan of condition assessments, as I think several of you know, but I think you could start in a simpler place, which is to create an inventory. And the inventory would have the square footage of the building, the number of grades, the number of classrooms, the age of the building, the time last modernized, and then as your inventory is set up as a framework, any information that flows into the state through the PIW gets linked to it, and then you have an ongoing record of the work that's done related to that building.
That's what I was trying to say. Instead of piecemealing this, why don't we have a community college system where we know every facility? Because first of all, what I heard from all three testimonies so far is this first attempt by the forum was basically to help them adjust costs for coming to us. Never once in there did I hear anything about what's the position of the state of being an oversight agency, or what position this board or anybody else, a fiscal duty. So it's almost like, and I don't want to paraphrase it bad, I'm not trying to be that way, but almost like, give me the money and then let's go do our thing. And maybe that's how it was set up originally, but if you truly want a partnership, I mean, we're at the stage now, $600 million later, we have no more dollars. Do we come back? Do we keep fighting for more and more resources? Even Prop 39 in the project, we are all kind of saying the same thing. Schools should get these dollars. It could go to any public building. It would probably actually be more efficient to go to buildings that are open 365 days a year versus one that are open half the year right now. But we're trying to be partners in this. So if we create a database, it should be something that's useful for the districts and for everybody else as well. Not just for us for oversight. It should be a system that is useful for districts to internalize, and a lot of the bigger ones already have them, a lot of smaller ones don't. Well, I'm saying they're not in the same system. Is there a way to combine and create a product that is good for everybody's purposes, not just extra work to keep those guys happy at the state because they're going to give us more money, and not something like that, but something that is useful for a tool for your organization, for the district board to say, yeah, this one campus is now at 40% life cycle right now because it's as they had a new rep in 25 years. You know, they could easily do inventory, and they could sit there and make projections of what kind of money they're going to need and stuff. So when those boards come up to Bobby, me, or Joan, or somebody else and say, we need more construction money, we need more dollars in this, they actually can see that as well. But for me, taking a snapshot in time right now, I could tell you every building in my local city that when I was on council, the life cycle was, what money we're putting away, the room, space, we had all that stuff organized, which is not as big as some of these districts. But that's even more cause for them to have a system that maybe we could all be on the same system to help with. But for me to sit up there and say, we spent $33 billion, and I want to go out for another 15 maybe, coming up, and I can't say what property we bought even, what inventories we have of anything like this, and to also see in the paper that decline enrollment and schools are being leased or they want to sell it and things. There's a snapshot in time right now is poor for me. I can't sit there and say, how do I go out and try to get more dollars and do things like this if I can't explain where the $33 billion went to begin with. And I'm not saying that nothing was wrong, but I'm saying that is that's the obligation I feel that the legislature has and the role of the central government has, is to at least have that accountability report out. And I don't want to make any extra work, but is there a way we can use our current resources, either what we have or the Prop 39 dollars, which is what is in the bills right now, to use that funding to, A, do the assessments, because if you saw that Prop 39, there's money to go out there and actually take a snapshot at your facilities, and B, to actually develop a database system to report that into. I think now's the time to try to do that before you go back. I'm not saying you have to go retrofit everything, but now you come back and we start talking next year to put a bond on the ballot, we can at least get some kind of data to what to go for. You know, should we go 50-50, new construction, old construction, or what?
It was one of the recommendations of the UC Berkeley report was to have, it was a tiered, it was to have an inventory. And then secondarily, I think where it parted company probably with some of the constituents is that it recommended that decisions be based upon a priority of that inventory. And so that's where, people started indicating, well, there's winners and losers of that world. But I think what Bill is talking about is beginning that baseline inventory. And it's been done in other states, and it also is, there's an industry standard around assessment. That you go in, you look at life cycle costs. There's many different types of assessments, but there's an industry standard around that. A little bit where the wrinkle I feel in the whole industry standard is, what is educationally appropriate? What is 21st century learning? How do we support that in our school buildings? It's very easy to say the HVAC doesn't work. We can fix that, but how do we structure our buildings so that they're delivering program in the best manner possible so that we can be a vibrant state? So that's the wrinkle I see sometimes in the assessment piece, but it's been done by other states, and I think there's examples out there if that's the direction that we want to go as a state.
If I can try to get back to something I was trying to get before, asking for a lot of information and not saying we're going to focus on that in terms of funding is not the direction I think to go. I think what is suggested is something that is basic, and I think that's the better approach. The example that I was going to try to get to was that within the current document for new construction, we asked, what do you spend on, beyond the state program, on off-site costs? Because cities and counties, prior to the Marina decision, an important decision that says if you have an impact, such as an impact on traffic down the road, you have to pay for the cost of the traffic signal, left-hand turn lanes and the like. The program doesn't do that, but that's actually something that's asked in this current existing DIT new construction. If you're not going to provide funding for something, why ask that kind of a question? Is it to find exactly what are you spending on schools? So what I'm suggesting is it'd be wonderful to have all the information that I would want as a superintendent of the school district to say, what do I need to do for this educational environment? Maybe I have that, maybe I don't have that. But basic information that is being suggested, I think, is a way to begin with an assessment at the beginning when you apply for funding. What is that age of building? What are the number of classrooms? That kind of information.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, a couple of comments, I think, on just some of the testimony. There was references that the information is not being used for bond accountability purposes. We use the current information that's from the form, and we summarize it and provide it to the board members on a monthly basis, or when we meet at the state board level, state allocation board. And then we also, as Mr. Savage mentioned earlier, each of the PIWs is found on the bond accountability website. So I just wanted to clarify that we believe that it is serving that purpose, which we believe is a very strong and a very relevant purpose, which is to inform the taxpayers of what they're getting for their investment in school bonds. So we are using it for bond accountability purposes.
Well, this is where I am. I haven't spoken too much. I think it is difficult to implement at the tail end of a program, but I think if we're moving on to a new program, it certainly would be an appropriate time to implement the changes. I agree with, I think, what I'm hearing from both of my colleagues here, that something needs to be done that will give us some kind of a state inventory so we know what we have in terms of classrooms, so we know the ages of the buildings, and we know what we're doing when we build a new building or when we modernize a building. And I will share with you that when we did our first bond in my school district, frankly, it was with our facilities person picking numbers out of the air. And what happened was we couldn't deliver on most of those projects because some of those numbers were years old and no one really took a look at what needed to be done. And so we instituted a process where we started doing, at the request, by the way, of our Prop 39 committee and the board, very in-depth postmortems on all of our projects to take a look at what we spent and whether it was in design or, in each category, what it cost us. So then when we had future bonds, we were much better prepared to apply cost factors to square footages or what we were doing and come up with better estimates so we could actually deliver on the bond itself. So I wouldn't assume that all large school districts are doing this, but I think you probably have many districts that are doing it already. And I don't know if this is the perfect form. It certainly is what I would call a minimalist form. But I will tell you, it's hard for me as a legislator to say, we need another bond. How much do we need for modernization? We don't even know how many buildings we have out there, how old they are, and when was the last time we touched them, and what we did. When we take a look at new construction, it's you need to know what you did with new construction. And I have to say that the program, in my mind, when it was revamped back, starting in 98, 2000, it was never intended. It was intended to be a partner. We really weren't establishing, trying to tell districts exactly what kind of school you should build. We were trying to provide an incentive out there for the state to partner with developers, partner with school districts, and upgrade our schools. I mean, we had overcrowding everywhere, and so we knew we needed new classrooms. You had housing developments that were being added. We needed new schools to house those kids, and we wanted a program that would allow you to build those schools before the kids arrived, so you weren't always playing catch-up. And the program in that regard has worked wonderfully because you've taken $35 billion in state general obligation bonds, you've matched that with a little over $70 billion in local bonds and developer fees, and we've had significant upgrades to schools. But it's hard to be as big as a state like California is and have so little data to look at to make decisions. And so I actually do believe, I think with both, that we need to have something that will give us an inventory of our buildings, and we also need to have, if we can improve, or if we don't need all three new construction reports, I think we probably should take a look at that, since the full state allocations board charged us with taking a look at all of this. We need to take a look at what we're doing for new construction. I don't want people to report data that's not used at the same time we need to have the meaningful information. And I think with the modernization, if we can improve on this, fine, but we have to do something to start collecting data, to have that data available.
Madam Chair, I just have a couple, specifically on these things. On our Phase 2 project sheet, I didn't see anything for maybe soft costs, like architect, management, or anything like that.
They're reported on the first page. The project cost data is reported on the very first page.
Okay.
And so the point about this page would be that the individual hard cost scope would get reported for the modernization scope elements. And so that way you could at least have kind of a tracking of the level, what, in general terms, type of work you did, about how much money you spent in each area, including technology, etc.
So, Bill, just so, are you saying
Page
that
4.
Page 4, is this the total form or just the
No, that's
portion
the
of it?
project information page. There's a cost page, is page 1. Then there's the project information page. And then after that, there's the bid climate page, and then the final page is the high performance page.
So we're just looking at one portion of it.
Correct. And because this is what we focused on with Brian and OPSC and the IP committee, it's a pretty difficult task, actually. How do you do a simple questionnaire for modernization, because the scope of work is so complex and so all over the place and so varied?
No, I like the category stuff. I do think this hopefully become part or subset of the bigger database, and then that way you just click on, okay, this school, click, this building, click, I did HVAC, it cost this much, click. And then this one I did click, 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 you could go down and have the drop-down menus. But again, it should be a tool useful. I guess that's my follow-up question is, with the current dollars we have now, and I don't know how the bonds are written or what the administration costs. Obviously, there is an administration cost to oversight and doing what you guys do. Is there any way in that administration cost, or is there a way to use any of those dollars to build the database system? Question 1. Question 2 would be, I know there's money in, and our bills are coming out with the Prop 39 dollars to have this. Obviously, they need to talk together, work together, be part of it. Because I know, at least in the governor's proposal, he does have a billable amount that you could do if you want. Again, the schools get the dollars. If they don't want to hire someone to go do that assessment, they can do it themselves. But there is an assessment amount of level 1, 2, and 3 that the governor allows them to charge off the money they get. So do we have those things built into our current bonds at all? If not, that's probably something we need to look for in the future. Or can we piggyback off the Prop 39 dollars in order to develop this very work? I want the partners to be involved to design it, because at the end result, we need to get our information that we need out of it, but it should be a working tool for districts to keep track of their inventory.
You don't want us to have to duplicate what we're doing. Whatever we do, you want us to flow from Prop 39 to changes here.
And there may be systems already out there. I'm sure LA Unified probably has a fantastic system already because they are so big. I'm sure other school districts may have ones already we can look on. And if there is a standard out there, can we provide that software, make it changeable for everybody else, and then add it for the rest of the school districts? I don't know.
Well, I would say, too, because we are looking at parts of the UC Berkeley report that we can look at in terms of implementation, because of the inventory issue, we started a working group, within the Department of Education that are looking at master plan educational specifications and assessments to look at, is there some standardized method that we could report this information or have this information that's both useful to the field and that would be useful to the state government. And it might be that the locals want a greater degree of information, but that what bubbles up to the state is less so, but that it would be systematic. So we started a working group around that, and hopefully would have some recommendations around this as it moves forward. As well, because I think it is important work. And the piece of the form I wanted to ask how you were, and I think I know, but I want to make sure, is if people are modernizing for educational appropriateness, where would they be reporting that in this form?
The revised form doesn't capture that. That was something that we had tried to capture in the original version. But we were told that to try to put it in context of everything else, to capture all of that type of information was very time consuming. So now we just focus on the hard costs and just assume, well, the HVAC was replaced because it was worn out, but it doesn't speak to intent.
To be honest with you, it's a pretty complex piece to try and report the data for, because let's say you're creating project-based learning centers to support 3 classrooms. The scope of work to do that might be demolition and reconstruction of interior partitions, it might be HVAC system reconfigurations, lighting changes. That's all captured here. You could have another place where you could report that was the purpose of that work, perhaps. But it's a fairly complex piece.
I get that it's complex, but I'll tell you from our vantage point, from the educational side, I think it's important to capture. And that is because all this work, ultimately, I mean, it is improving aging infrastructure, but let's be real. I mean, the real reason, too, is student experience and performance. And so if there's a way simply to capture, are we making that mark? Are we falling short of it?
How do you define it? I mean, your definition of educational appropriateness may be different than my definition, and every school district is not the same. And to try and say at the state level, these are what your schools are going to look like.
I don't know if you define it, but you can ask for it. It's information. I mean, I'm not saying that you must always, build your facility in X manner. That is a local decision. But if here's the problem. Tell me the answer. The problem is, my gut is that we are not getting down to educational modernization because we can't get the HVAC fixed. I still think that it should be on the table and that it should be part of the discussion. So if I did modernize for educational appropriateness, I think we can capture that statement. If it's more complex to capture what I actually did, I don't think we need to go that far. But I do think it's part of the discussion because we're not just modernizing infrastructure.
I don't think you can define educational appropriateness. I think if an individual school district says, we want to take these 3 classrooms and create one, they should get the same amount of money that they would get for the 3 classrooms. And then they're making a local decision in terms of how they want to change their classrooms. So each district ultimately is making a decision about educational appropriateness and what they want. So the question is, are we a partner where we're giving districts a grant and continuing to allow them to have the authority to define that and build based on what they deem is appropriate and what they want to put in, or are we defining that
Well,
more?
let us look at the metrics for that. I mean, our Title V is about educational appropriateness, so there is some vision about what we believe school districts should be considering, both process-wise and also the piece of it. I think where we definitely need the discussion is, are we in the way of someone wanting to do exactly what you said by going, the state considers you have 3 classrooms. In your modernization of that, you break that down to 1 classroom, and we say you can't do that because you just lost 2 classrooms of capacity or whatever. Then I think we do need to look at that, and there are instances of that happening.
But that's an eligibility issue, which I think we can address. The educational appropriateness where I end up taking a step back is we tore down schools and replaced them. Schools that I'm sure at the time were the trend in terms of educational appropriateness.
Pod schools, yeah.
That's exactly right, the open pod schools, and they did not work. And so,
I've heard a lot about the pod schools not working.
I'm just saying that if you go through school construction, you had the schools that were designed sort of the finger approach. Some were aligned with the street, some were aligned. You have all these different trends of design, and I really shudder when when we talk about the state determining or defining what educationally appropriate is, and I may not agree with how those decisions Kurt makes about his schools, but you've got an elected board, you've got a superintendent, you've got others that have to make decisions about how they want to design their schools, and some designs will be a function of, if I'm in the middle of a big city, I've got different kind of constraints than if I'm in a more rural or suburban area, so they have to make those decisions. Now, where I think I agree with you is, if you're going to combine 3 classrooms into one big classroom, I don't want that to be gamed, so all of a sudden the district gets 2 more new classrooms that it gets to build. But if you want to combine that and take eligibility for 3 classrooms with kids, I don't have a problem with that. So I think there needs to be some flexibility on one end, but in terms of trying to define educational appropriateness or whatever, we define what building standards are, but I just think that that's going to change and evolve over time, and you could get into that discussion and end up, we build a school now, 30 years from now we want money to tear it down and build a new one because it's no longer educationally appropriate. 30 years from now, you make decisions and you have to...
Well, I'd say build on the agreement. I don't think that the state should be in the way of what educationally school districts want to do. So if we have things that are like that, we need to address them. And also, I will say, I think that as part of the discussion about future bond measures, that we are looking at, is there things that we need to do educationally, or that we stood in the way of funding educationally that are being missed? I do think that conversation is necessary, whether we want to quantify it or not.
And I think I'm trying to take what you're trying to get to, and maybe try to figure out how pragmatically you could do like categories, like on a scale of 1 to 3. How are you with your school's technology? We're a 1, so we need to go. That's the area that you want to go through. You're a 1 to 3. How's the livability or environment for the student? We got old roofs, and there's always 95 degrees in that classroom, and it smells like rat droppings. That's probably a 0. You could do different kind of those type of assessments, maybe, and that's where you go to your grading system like the federal government does, broad scale without being prescriptive, saying that, well, every school room should have a wireless and 2 hard IT lines and a projector. You don't have to have that perspective at all. But I know, like in my daughter's classrooms, we raised outside money to give the 5th graders the high-speed lab that I only saw in high schools. So it's different, appropriate for them, yes. Would it be appropriate for every school? Don't know. So I don't think you put those standards there, but you can go like a grade, A through F or the case may be on those type of broad scales so they can self-report, and that way, if I'm a school district, I'm not going to self-report an F unless I really need help in something, because then I'm going to have somebody yell at me, why is your school an F? Or some kind of standard you may want to put out there and make it self-report, if you want. But I think by giving them the dollars really is what they need. They need the resources to do it. It's just, honestly, I don't know how much to go out for the resources or how much, everything should cost right now without having some kind of assessment tool to know where we're at and what kind of dents we made into. Let's say we spent $30 billion and you guys spent $70. $100 billion is spent 15 years. Do we do a 5% dent in what's needed, or a 50%, or a 75%? I don't think anyone can say, because we have no way to record that at this point. And how much ongoing? So if we're talking, here's something real pragmatic for you guys right now. We're talking budget right now. New funding formula for ADA. All these new things. Right now, I don't think we have a cutout for school maintenance. Well, how much should that be?
No, we've eliminated the requirement.
Yeah. And should we do that or not? And what happens if we don't? How long will these bonds last? Do we go completely on bonds to retrofit all these things? Do we put that burden on local school districts to take it out of their operating account? And they do that voluntarily. What happens if the school district doesn't 10 years from now, and all of a sudden the roofs start falling in? Now are we in the hook for the state to come in with an emergency grant? These are the policy questions that I think, not just with these bond monies, but overall that we're trying to figure out how to do with the education stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to try and summarize and move this on.
Section 1.
Tell you where I think we have consensus. And so this is more work for all of you and Bill, I guess, but I think we have consensus around the fact that we would like to move towards developing a statewide inventory. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
And just to add on that, a system that's actually useful for the districts to help manage their
well,
own.
I think that's in here.
Okay.
Okay. And two, that we believe the PIWs are valuable for both new construction and modernization. And if, but I think we'd like you to take third, fourth, fifth look at it. I don't know which look you're on right now, but another look at them, just to take a look at the data, because as we move forward in terms of the new bond, we'd like to have everything as well coordinated as possible. So whether we need information on high performance, whether we need an interim, whether we, we need better definitions here, but I think we'd like you to take one last stab at the form so that the inventory we're collecting and the forms can match as seamlessly as possible. Also, taking into consideration that if we're required to do this for Prop 39, we don't want to continue reinventing the wheel every time something comes up. We want to have, some sort of system that will give us meaningful data with that can be collected as efficiently as possible. So
question in regard to the statewide facility inventory. So we're suggesting that would be a condition of funding?
Well, I think we're going to get into talking about that, but, at some point in time, you've got to decide what's important, and you've got to ask yourself if, when this program was originally developed, you had to establish a baseline eligibility in order to participate in the program. I mean, basically how many classrooms did you have, and what the square footages were, and how many students, and what was your growth population. I think, we ought to take a look at what's involved and whether or not we should move in that direction. I think it merits considerable discussion.
And following question, we still have roughly $600 million outstanding, which the next 18 months, 2 years of the projects.
Well, for the projects that they've already been awarded, I think it's very difficult to change. Myself, I think it's very difficult to change the rules midstream. We're trying to come up with what is a statewide inventory and all of that going to look like. And my basic belief of my time sitting on this committee is that it's very difficult to add these things in mid-bond, and we're near the end, and so to do that now when people are sort of been playing under a certain set of rules for a number of years, I think is going to meet with great resistance, and probably for some good reasons. But let's try and take the next step here. I mean, my basic feeling is if we're going to start a new program, let's start it with the new program and be really clear instead of...
But we kind of are 39. That's what I'm wondering. If we are already doing this for 39...
Right, but that's why if we can have some work done on what a statewide inventory would look like, you're right, 39, for the districts that are participating, if that's a requirement, they would have to start with that new program. And, in terms of the modernization and new construction, they would have to start with this new program.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that it's not a separate program.
No, that's why it needs to...
It has to be a global thing.
Right.
That you just add the module onto it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
One of the suggestions also in the Berkeley report was on the inventory is really looking at what is the existing available information and mining that first, perhaps, to begin that structure. And there does seem to be, through the PIW, through the information that OPSC has, the Department of Ed and perhaps the Division of State Architect mining that to see, maybe there's some baseline that can be updated or built upon. Would be part of that investigation into the inventory.
I'm kind of surprised. I was just surprised, A, we didn't have the data, but B, the Department of Education is having this data either.
Yeah. Well, we've never been part of that system.
We have three silos kind of overwatching the local
trying to get
districts.
CalPads to work and tell us basic information about the kids we're educating. So,
Yeah, it's kind of
so I think, is that clear? We want to have a statewide inventory, and then we do want to have PIWs for new construction and modernization, but take one more look at that to determine how those fit together, and acknowledging some of Hagman's comments in terms of if we are going to require this information on Prop 39, that we don't duplicate, that we have one system that hopefully will.
And who, I guess, it's still the big Prop 39 question, is OPSC, Department of Education, who's supposed to be the keeper of this database? And that's there needs to be a
Well, I
point.
think OPSC, I would, you can make your recommendations there.
But if they have no funding to do something like this, then what do we do?
Well, that's the limitations we do have in our administrative budget. We don't have a separate line item other than our personal services, and our budget is very limited in what we
Well,
can.
let's figure out what we want to do first. And
Right.
what is involved,
And what might be
then
involved,
we'll have to figure out, if it's, we all agree that it should be done, we'll figure out who should have responsibility. What it's going to cost and who's going to have
And just to
responsibility.
clarify, Madam Chair, is this within the context of a new program or to collect the inventory now?
Well, I would think it's both in terms of ongoing and with the new program, because if this is required for Prop 39 and you're going to have an inventory, I don't think we want to ask districts to gather information today and then gather different information
In the governor's office.
a year and a half from now. I think we've got to have a way of having it fit together.
So on the Prop 39 bills that you said were amended, it's an overall inventory and not just an energy efficiency inventory that was amended in?
Correct. It's much more comprehensive than I was even hoping for. But
And
that was
are those available yet?
They're all in the folks somewhere right now.
We don't know what gets through, but
Yeah. And they're all the same now. The only ones that made it out are all made it the same way. And that's on our side, and Senate has their own thing going, so.
okay. So I think we're as clear as we're going to be on this right now. And we're going to move on to tab 2, which is the role of state agencies in the school facilities program. And the intent on this, let me just say, was to give a broad overview of a project as it passes through or interacts with the different agencies, not to really drill down, because basically the state allocations board job is to approve the distribution of the funds, and so we primarily deal with OPSC, but we wanted to, at least with the members, since too bad we're not all here, at least have this overview. So.
Thank you. So we're beginning on page 7 of the item, and as you mentioned, this is a broad overview of the state agencies. We do, of course, acknowledge that before the state agencies even get involved, there's a lot of work that's done at the local level, so we won't be addressing that in particular today, but just more of the highlights of each agency. And on page 8, we'll touch on this now, but what we have tried to do here is put the agencies, in context of where they fit into the different parts of designing and building a construction project. And to do that, we've broken down the life cycle of a school construction project into some steps. Now, this is drawn in a bit of a line, however, it's not always a linear process. So there are some districts that may not be doing these steps in the order that we've represented here, but this at least will allow you to see where the state agencies sort of fit in the planning stage or a plan review stage or down at the construction stage, etc. So hopefully that can serve as a reference as we go through. So, but rather than spoil the presentation, we'll save that to come back at the end where it might make a little more sense. Moving on then to page 9, the first agency that we are going to start with today is the California Department of Education, and specifically the School Facilities and Transportation Services Division. And for purposes of facilities, and I'll be using the term CDE, meaning this particular division, but CDE focuses on the student safety and the educational appropriateness of the facilities. And actually, as we're going through this, I'll point out that we're going to connect this to the education codes and requirements that state agencies have to follow, the districts have to connect with, and then also how the state agencies fit into the funding process, which we're using the term basically OPSC requirements or funding application requirements to sort of connect it to the school facility program. Education Code 17251 requires CDE to develop standards for school districts to use in the selection of school sites and the design of schools. And the most recent version of those standards was adopted by the State Board of Education in 2000, and it's contained in the California Code of Regulations, Title V. And for purposes of this presentation, I'll be using Title V for that terminology. I think we're all pretty familiar with that at this point. But also the Education Code requires that if a school district is seeking funding through the school facilities program, that the State Allocation Board may not apportion funds unless the district has obtained approval from CDE that the site and building plans and specifications comply with the standards adopted by that department. So this is a requirement for school districts to participate in the funding process. And the standards that the CDE develops and the districts comply with ensure that the construction of the facilities is educationally appropriate and it promotes school safety. For comprehensive list of statutory and regulatory references, we have included that at the end of this section.
Can I ask a quick question here? Kathy, because of this, wouldn't CDE have basically the basic inventory out there anyway? If you have to approve the site and look at it, isn't that something we should be able to pull out and data mine to get the basic site database going?
We, of all projects that have come through our office, we have site knowledge, yes. We don't have it in a database. No one has asked for it in that method. What we do is, for purposes of the board, we send a letter that says, this is the site that has been selected and it's approvable by our standards. But we do, every site that this board has approved has come through our office, and then some, because there's many that get, that don't go forward on.
And just to add on that is, like, for a while they were buying future sites, vacant lands and stuff like that. Is that also something that you would?
Yes and no. I mean, some districts went forward and we called it land banking at the time, went forward with a land bank, and they could or could not have come into our office because you're not required to come into CDE unless there's state funding. So land banking was done at local expense, and they may have purchased a site and then come through for approval. Others may have done it and simultaneously sought our approval, because if you bought a site that would have a problem with us, that was a problem for you.
Mm-hmm. No, but if it's state money, then we would know about it somewhere. Yes. So we could get that data as well. Okay.
Yeah. So picking up on page 10, I'd like to highlight some of the processes in place for the CDE reviews and approvals. Now, there are two main reviews, and one relates to the site, as Ms. Moore just mentioned, and then also there is the approval of the plan. But in the site review and approval process, the school districts provide the CDE with information related to 3 or more potential sites, and then CDE staff does actually do site visits to go out and take a look at the sites and provide feedback to the school district with written evaluations and rankings of the sites, and they include a feasibility of whether that site is appropriate for an educational setting. And then once that feedback has been received by CDE, the district decides which site they're going to pursue. And when selecting a site, the district looks at specific characteristics at the site, and after doing some evaluations, they report back to CDE that the site is suitable for use as a school. And when they are doing that, they have to consider some safety issues, such as proximity to airports, high transmission power lines, the busy roads that could pose a safety hazard, pipelines, which I'm sure you've heard about at this point. We've had a few items go forward with those. And then what happens next is that CDE reviews the district's submittal, and if the site is acceptable, then a site approval letter is issued, and this letter is valid for 5 years. And the site approval letter is submitted to OPSC as part of a request for school facilities program funding. And in addition to letting OPSC know that the site has been approved, there's also other information in that letter that can be used when calculating funding information, such as, for example, the number of acres that are usable at that site for a school purpose, because the whole piece of land that the district purchases may not all be usable for the school, and that's something that we use to assist us in determining the funding amounts that are recommended to the State Allocation Board. So moving on to the plan approval process, the school's design is based on the requirements of Title V and the educational specifications that are approved by the local school board. The educational specifications help to inform the architect on what types of facilities are necessary for the educational program. And I'd like to draw your attention to page 10. At the bottom there are some bulleted items that CDE will review to determine that the plan of the school facilities does meet the requirements in Title V. So it includes things such as the layout of the site, for example, the parking and drop-off area, supervision, just some things that are important. I think one that stands out to me is an example that CDE has used in the past where location of the buildings can impede a teacher's ability to see the entire site. There's a nice graphic where if you just move the building over a little bit, then you have a full view of the entire play area and there are no hidden corners, so CDE can assist districts in figuring out, hey, is this building laid out? Is the school laid out so that it's addressing safety?
Again, so some of this data is already there, the inventory, not just the sites, but also the classroom size and square footage, things like that. And do we, when someone builds the school, after it's been approved, go through the whole process, someone check the plan versus the completion? And basically the same thing we started on?
My understanding that CDE and DSA plans can be submitted at the same time, and that upon occasion CDE doesn't have the set of plans that DSA receives. OPSC reviews to the DSA plan approvals, and upon occasion there are slight differences in things such as classroom counts. So it may not be a complete match with what CDE has done, but in most cases it's reasonably close.
And one of the things we square up is when our plan review letter comes through and OPSC has done their review, they're ensuring that it squares with that. Or there's a request for a scope change on the part of the department. But to answer your question, we don't go back and review at the end of a program. We don't, Department of Ed. Did you build what we approved in that letter? I think part of the project information worksheet is looking at it versus what the board approved.
And I'm not trying to be argumentative here by any chance, but this is one of the things we had on a very small scale in my city. I had the planning, I had three or four different things, and my developers come in and get banged around. One person would ask for something, they would change all the plans to go to the next person, they would have another problem, and they'd go back to the first one they would approve, and this thing took too long, added quite a bit of cost to doing things. I know we spend a lot of money for our schools. Always wondered how do we spend so much money compared to private sector, and maybe because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5, if not more, departments, all the hands in the cookie jar want their own thing. Wouldn't it be kind of make sense to take one agency and take the staff they have in your facility that works on this, the staff that Department of Toxic Substance Control, and all the rest of the 5 or 6 agencies who do have oversight, do have jobs, and being like one-stop shop and be in one location, that way it's all in one place and we could maybe get it out quicker, more efficiently. I know like we do that with the Attorney General's office, we've actually put some of the Department of Insurance investigators over there so they can work collaboratively together, and they're funded out the different agencies, but they're all in one location, they're all on the same page. Is that something we can look, maybe if we do go out to new bonds and stuff, maybe to streamline the process, have it all in one shop, and that way it's all a lot more easy for everyone to do what they're supposed to do?
Are you asking me? Yeah. Because we're all part of that. Since we're in the California Department of Education portion of it, I'll certainly comment. I think that you are hitting on an issue that has been brought up in probably every single report that has looked at the agency. Beginning back with the report that was done in 2008 in our offices around these issues, the 2010 report by the expert work group that was run by the DSA, or the DGS, excuse me, the Superintendent Schools of the Future report, the UC Berkeley report. It was consistent throughout it that the handoff of the agencies, it does create complexity. And in fact, I mean, you can go back to 1949 reports that say, there should be one agency. It is an issue that has been a part of this system for some time, and you're right to point it out. And I think if there's ever going to be anything done about it, it has to be considered legislatively, because each entity has legislative duties and obligations.
And I'm not saying shut down one or the other. I'm just saying maybe the staff, is all in one building. For each one to handle these things, they're still paid by DOE, they're still paid by DTSC, and I have to get all the acronyms right, still DSA. They're still employees of those agencies, but they're all on one floor somewhere in one of our state buildings, and they're all talking together, and they're all part of the same kind of group.
So we live in an age of IT and communication, and you can have big tech companies that can have engineers all over the world working on the same project. I mean, there's no reason, if we're talking about a database where we have the inventory and the information, why everyone has to be in exactly the same place. We have to have some kind of agreement on what is the information we want to collect, who's going to be responsible for that, and then, you can also partition a database if you're dealing with, what you want to create your own little cloud or something, so that, you can then determine how the fields get filled in. Because that's the real question is, I think our trying to reorganize the executive branch of government is going to be pretty hard, beyond our scope and pretty hard to do. But certainly in terms of trying to define what is that information that should go into the database and who should be responsible, I think it's not unreasonable for us to maybe try and tackle some of that, particularly as it relates to facilities and funding, because that's
one of the recommendations again in the UC Berkeley report was that at maximum you would have your systems the same, and at minimum you would have your systems at least be able to talk to one another. And right now we have neither. So as we look forward into the future, DSA, because they're executive branch, DSA and OPSC systems seem to be working fairly well together, but they'll probably need to be revamped in the future as well. And we aren't in that loop. And DTSC isn't in that loop, and DIR isn't in that loop. So those pieces are ones that have been recommended previously.
And our purpose is to, allocate state funding for school facility, and so this is really going beyond and reorganizing government, and because we don't fund every type of school construction.
No, but I do think when I've talked about for 2-3 years, how's it cost me $650 a square foot for a new school when I could build pretty much anything else out there for a lot less? So when I go back and ask, are we wasting the dollars somehow, or this is probably a lot of the problem? So I think it is reasonable for this board, who's the keeper of the funds, to try to get the best bang for the dollars out there, to say, hey, if it's our side, if it's the state impeding those costs, if the state's adding 20% to it because of the bureaucracy that we all hear about, then we probably should at least discuss it and bring it up, because you do have legislative representatives on the board to go back up and say, hey, we can go maybe discuss this. We maybe can go do the different scope of work. I'm not holding my breath for that IT solution after taking, 12 years for the courts. They still don't talk to each other, and over $1.4 billion later. So, I'm hopeful.
That's another story that we don't want to get into.
Yeah.
About that, and I'd be happy to talk about that. But let me just say, to try and finish by noon. I said we'd probably be done by 10:30. Let us just say that we all agree we need an inventory, and we don't, we need to come to some kind of consensus on what should be in that and how we should collect the data in the most efficient manner. And if we could then just continue to walk through what the role is of each agency now, maybe we can then get to the heart of this discussion.
we're on about page 11 here. So CDE reviews and approves the construction plans to make sure that the standards in Title V have been met. And then when CDE approves the plans, what happens is a plan approval letter is issued. And this plan approval letter is issued, and it's required when a school district submits a school facility program application. We do need to see, OPSC needs to see that letter, and it helps to not only show that the Title V standards have been met, but it also contains other information that's useful for funding, such as the number of teaching stations that are in there, if core facilities are in there. It provides verification that if it's necessary, the Department of Toxic Substances Control review and approval has been received. There's a paragraph in the CDE plan approval letter that indicates that. There is also a process in CDE to do a preliminary or a final plan approval review, and in most cases it's the final plan approval that is necessary for the funding portion, but the preliminary plan review allows the school districts to work with CDE to get feedback on things that may help them to design the project so that it can be approved. And CDE does provide that input to help the districts meet the requirements. Final plan approval letters, once they're obtained, are valid for 2 years. And then if I could draw your attention to page 12, in addition to the design and the plan and site approval process, CDE also has other functions that are related to the school facility programs, other programs. For example, there are reviews for the environmental and financial hardship best available alternative site certification. So that is necessary if districts are purchasing sites that require extensive cleanup. CDE has reviewed and said that yes, this is the best option under the circumstances. The CDE also takes a look at the Career Technical Education Facilities Program. There are evaluations and scoring processes that are done for applicants under that program, and CDE has the knowledge base to do that evaluation and scoring, and then that scoring is used for the funding process once the applications have been submitted. And for the overcrowding relief grant, the CDE verifies the site-specific eligibility because that program relates to the number of students that are on the site and the appropriate pupil density. So CDE does that review and provides that information so that an application can be submitted. For the charter school facility program, at the stage when applicants are submitting a preliminary apportionment application, CDE helps them determine what the necessary site size is for the project, because at that stage it's a guess of how big the site ultimately will be. So that helps aid in setting aside the appropriate amount of funding for that project, and then that's roughly similar to the joint use program, where CDE looks at the maximum square footage of joint use projects. So there are multiple roles in addition to the basic plan and site approval where CDE is interacting with this program. And I believe that hits the high level of CDE's roles. Beginning with page 13 are all the specific regulatory and ed code references in there. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any of the high-level questions, but there are also some folks here from CDE that could address any of the more detailed questions as well. And of course, Ms. Morris.
Any comments or anything?
I don't think I have more comments on Barbara obviously did a nice job going over the highlights. The one that I would definitely draw attention to that is the Career Technical Education Program and the interaction of that program, which has been very different than the other programs that we work on, and how successful I believe it is because it was a marriage of the program components and the facility components, and that is that school districts had to have a good educational approach to their career technical education, reviewed by experts in those areas at the department before they could receive a funding approval. And it was, I think it was one of the highlights of our programs this last time because of that marriage. It was really, I think we got very quality career technical education facilities built, because we had those program elements reviewed and advised upon. And that's one I would call attention to. And then I do think that, the site work or the site approvals that CDE does, there's a component of that does provide a protection for the state in that we're not, as best as can possible, things happen in projects all the time, but as best as possible, we're ensuring that the state dollars that are being expended on sites that are, not toxic dumps. You'll hear more about the toxic Department of Toxic Control's responsibilities there, but that are safe for students and staff, and I think that's an important component of the program that's provided, as well as the educational pieces looking at Title V. Anything from staff? Questions?
You want the DTSC?
DTSC, and so that's Tracy Sharp, this material. Good morning. I'm Tracy Sharp, and I'm giving you just a high-level overview of the Department of Toxic Substance Control role in the school facility process. And basically, and that's starting on page 31, the mission of the DTSC is to protect all of us and the environment from harmful effects of toxic substances. And that role in the school facility program relates to school assessment, investigation, and cleanup of proposed new sites, as well as when there's expansions to existing sites. Basically, DTSC is going to make sure that they're free of contaminants before the district starts building on that site to protect the future occupants, basically, of the site. And this is the DTSC review process applies to all projects that are going to receive funding through the school facility program. That's required in the education code. If a district is doing a locally funded project that will not request state funds, the DTSC review process is voluntary. So moving on to the...
Just a quick question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't want to slow us down.
Okay.
So it's voluntary if they check out if they're spending, the district spend their own dollars on their own project. They don't have to make sure the soil's safe.
That's my understanding, yes.
So that makes sense to me. If you're there to do a protection of the public, one way or the other, and especially our students, that just seems like a checkoff you would normally do wherever you build a school. And regardless if it's state dollars or local dollars.
Yeah.
And could I real quick just say we have a member of the school school cleanup program here from DTSC. I was going to introduce him as soon as we were done, but I'm happy to invite him up now as well.
On for a locally funded district that doesn't ask for
This is Fred Yeager from the Department of Education.
Title V standards apply to all schools. And if you're coming to the state, we have to actively review and sign off on it. But Title V standards for sites do contain a number of environmental assessments that districts are required to follow. There is just no state verification that that process is followed.
Okay, so you still have the safety checkoff, so to speak. It's just when that you hire the state to check it off, or you hire somebody else to check it off. Okay, so if
a district goes ahead and builds, and we haven't signed off on it, and then they have problems down the road, you potentially are opening up some liability there.
From that, and I don't know if you want to do this, but we have a lot of people actually do this stuff out there from the private sector. I was wondering if is that an issue? I think we have heard of sites that.
But wouldn't you want? I mean, the question is should they at least submit the report to DTSC that says that it's cleared. It's cleared, yeah.
Okay, introduce Thomas Koda from...
I'm Thomas Koda with the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and I'm a branch chief for the Southern California Schools Program. It's true. Under the Education Code, only schools that are receiving state funding or seeking state funds are required to have a Phase 1 environmental assessment reviewed by the department. And at that time, based upon the history of the site, we determined whether or not there was a potential for a release of hazardous substance and whether some additional investigation is required. We do have school districts that have local bond money, charter schools using private funds, and private schools and colleges have come to us under a voluntary cleanup agreement and seek our evaluation and approval of their sites. But that's purely on a voluntary process. They're not required under the Education Code to come to us for that assessment.
And I guess, I hate to get, I'm learning new stuff, so I'm sorry to get sidetracked on what we're trying to do here, but I'm just wondering, if a private school came to you and said, please check my site, okay, even though they had their own environmental work, do you charge them for that service?
There is a fee for service, yes. For the work that we charge reviewing the documents, we have scientists, toxicologists, geologists, hydrologists, folks like that, evaluate the site and make a determination whether the site is protected or not.
And I assume that, I'm hoping that if the builder decides not to go through the state's private funds, private school builds his own campus, that they're doing the same checking, because if we're here to protect, and I believe that's one of the government's core functions, is to protect our residents from whatever the case may be, public safety or environmental safety in this case, there should be at least some checkoff in there that says that part has been done. Even if it's not done by us, to quote the state, but it's done by someone else who is qualified to check that off. Is that the case?
We have had situations, and we've had talks with, we had a charter school wanting to site a high school, relocate their high school on top of a former Superfund site. That adjacent property was actually going to be the site for the remediation of the groundwater. We had numerous discussions with the facility, explained to them our concerns, the potential hazards. They were still interested in moving forward. We tried to explain the implication of trying to site a charter school, or any school for that matter, on a national Superfund site. Ultimately, after long discussions, they decided to look elsewhere. But under that scenario, they did not have to come to us under the school's education code for that approval. That was their decision after we had a lot of discussion with them. And it does happen quite a bit.
That's just interesting. We have all these departments and all the stuff. We can do at least a check off on that. And that, I assume the local control, the local planning or whoever has to zone that, pretty much institutions, pretty much anywhere. So I guess even the local city wouldn't even be able to stop it if they wanted to.
We're putting a lot of pressure through CEQA process and through, since it was a federal Superfund site with EPA, we are working together to enlighten them.
But that's an extreme case. So there's probably a lot of other cases out there that probably wasn't A, brought to your attention, or B, I don't know, something to look into separately.
Yeah, I think that was just, the question in my mind is,
got the education chair here.
If it's paid for with taxpayer dollars, whether it's state bond money, local bond money, or through general fund money that we're giving school districts, if it's paid for with taxpayer dollars, should we have a higher level of confidence that we're not building on sites like this? We're not exposing children or staff to toxins, and I get in all kinds of conversations with charter schools, but if a charter school for some reason stops operation and those children and the facilities revert back to the district, do you want to potentially have a school that the district can't use because it's,
I think in the overall system of the agencies, the only required agency, regardless of funding source, is the Division of State Architect. Is that correct? Our office, Department of Toxic Substance Control, and I think is DIR required regardless? Are only required approvals when it's state funding. So it is an issue that is open to legislative discussion, because that's how it shows up in the legislation.
Okay. So now Is there more, obviously?
Just a little bit
Okay.
more. And I want to say that highlights the OPSC role. When we receive a funding application, we're looking at the documents. We're looking at the DTSC determination letters, and also what's contained in the CDE plan approval and site approval letters to make sure that these steps have been taken. So that just kind of emphasizes what we're looking at to ensure that they've complied with these various steps. And that's something that is available to everyone. DTSC has a database out there, the EnviroStore, that we might take a look at if we need additional information. And it's obviously available to the public as well. And very quickly, I will mention that there's essentially a three-step process, which Thomas already alluded to. The step one is the phase one environmental site assessment to look at the history of the site. What was it used for? Or are there naturally occurring substances there to look at that? And if nothing is found, then a no further action determination comes out of that. District can proceed. But if there is a potential there for a contaminant, they need to do a more in-depth review, and that's step 2 on page 33, the preliminary environmental assessment. That's going to get into testing and sampling. And the DTSC is involved in that process. They're overseeing that testing to make sure that the findings are accurate and done appropriately. If that results in the finding that there are contaminants there, that a potential cleanup is needed, the district is at a decision point there. They can choose to proceed with that site, and that's why it's called the voluntary cleanup agreement. And go through a cleanup process, or they can say, no, don't want to go through the cleanup. We went to CDE, we proposed 3 potential sites, maybe there's another one that fits. Or maybe this really is the best available site, so we're going to go through that process with DTSC overseeing it and proceed. Now, and the limitation there is that they can start their funding process if their response action, that cleanup process, has been approved, but they can't start construction until that cleanup is complete. And there's details to that, too, that I speak to, but for the most part, no construction until it's clean.
And the DTSC process is part of the Department of Education's review of providing an approval of a site. So the Department of Education and DTSC have that interaction, that DTSC approval, or they have to have a certain level of approval. They can be working on this issue, and we would give them a contingent site approval, but ultimately we want to know that it clears DTSC in order for the site approval.
So I'd like to quickly touch on the funding then. The district can get additional grants when they're going to when they're acquiring a site for that DTSC review, and if they qualify, they can also get grants for the cost of that cleanup. I think that's it. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So now we move on to DFI.
Cover the DSA overview as well. And as we mentioned earlier, when it comes to school construction, K-12, all districts have to go through the Division of the State Architects review process. And this is to ensure compliance with the Field Act and California Building Code. The Field Act, and this is on page 35 of the agenda, ensures a higher level of seismic safety. The Field Act also requires that a licensed design professional has drawn the plans, that there's continuous oversight during construction, and that during that construction there are verified reports that are done by the project inspector, design professional, and contractors through the process. So before a district can start construction, they must go through plan review. The DSA is involved from the beginning, reviewing the plans when they're drawn. They are there overseeing construction, and then for the closeout of the project itself. And their authority lies in education code and government code as the accessibility component. And of course, if you're pursuing state funding, request those DSA-approved plans. So basically, the plan review process is a district submits their plans to the DSA, and their review focuses on structural safety, fire and life safety, accessibility, and the fourth piece, the energy efficiency, is optional. If the district is pursuing high performance, at this point in time, high performance incentive grants, they're going to need that energy efficiency review as well to obtain high performance incentive grants for their project. And once the DSA has reviewed the plans, they will return them to the design professional with comments. If there's anything that needs to be changed, they'll have what's commonly known as the fact check meeting to go over those things and make any corrections necessary before final sign-off and stamp out of those plans and providing the DSA plan approval letter. One other service that the DSA offers and encourages districts is if there's questions about a particular site, they can come in before they submit their plans to talk about particular issues on that project so they can get those design elements discussed early. So the second step is basically going to construction. And the DSA approval letter of those plans is good for a year, and basically the requirement is that district signs construction contracts within a year of that approval date, but they are able to get extensions if they don't go sign contracts within a year of getting that approval. The Field Act requires, as I mentioned earlier, the oversight, and a district will hire a project inspector that is eventually approved by that person is approved by the DSA, that they are qualified to perform the construction oversight, and they're there ensuring that the project is basically being built to the plans and specifications. There's also DSA field staff that are visiting the construction site as the project proceeds to ensure that, again, the project is being built to the plans and specs and that those required reports are being completed. And if there's changes on the project as it's going through construction, they can also look at that and provide approval. And the last step for the project is basically the project certification and closeout. And this is where the Division of the State Architect is reviewing all of the documents and verifying that the documents are part of the file and that the work was completed in compliance with the approved plans and specifications.
So if I could make a quick, you're like the plan check. You're like my planning department in the city. You're the plan check.
Right.
Okay. So you actually have the plans, and you actually physically look at the site plans and stuff like that. So again, we have already our basic database built in the DSA. We just need to pull it all together, and we have our database. There we go.
So while DSA does this for, as we established earlier, for every school construction project, what does the OPSC look at? Well, basically with the funding application, we're getting a full set of the DSA approved plans, the plan approval letter, so that we can confirm what the district is asking for in the plans, and it helps us to verify the grants that they're requesting in their funding application as well. So we're going through a verification that they've completed that step for funding. The other required documents, as we have listed there on page 37, as I mentioned, the plan approval letter, the stamped plans. If the district is requesting, as I mentioned earlier, HPI grants, they're going to have a verification of the points achieved through their energy review, and those points determine the actual amount of an additional grant that they're getting for those high-performance components. And the last document that we may get, and this is strictly for modernization projects, is if the district is asking for an additional grant for fire and life safety or accessibility work in there, they will submit a form that will outline the minimum work that's included in there, and there's 2 potential grants that they could apply for under that excessive cost hardship grant.
Any questions about DSA? Then we're going to move on to the DIR.
Yes, the next agency involved in the school facilities program is the Department of Industrial Relations. Within the DIR, the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement is responsible for enforcing the state's labor laws in regards to wages, hours, and working conditions for employees in California. The DLSE achieves this enforcement by investigating and prosecuting complaints against contractors and subcontractors who violate the code requirements. Another important function of the DIR is that the director also approves and oversees the labor compliance program. I think some of you may have heard discussions at the SAB regarding issues with the LCPs, but just as a reminder, the LCP is an entity that's been approved by DIR to enforce compliance with prevailing wage laws. They review certified payroll records, they inspect job sites, investigate complaints, violations, and they take appropriate action when violations are found, among other things. On page 41, we've listed the process for DIR involvement in the SFP over the years as it's changed. Between 2003 and 2011, labor compliance programs were required for projects funded by Propositions 47 and 55. So any project that had started construction on or after April 2003, as signified in the date of notice to proceed, or the initial public works construction contract is awarded before January 1st, 2012, were required to initiate and enforce the LCP or contract with the DIR-approved third party. That change for contracts are awarded after January 1st, 2012. The Labor Code now requires that all state bond-funded projects, including school facilities, whose construction contracts were awarded, again, after January 1st of 2012, are subject to prevailing wage and monitoring by the DIR. There are a few exemptions. Basically, if the awarding body has previously approved LCP that the director has approved for continued use in lieu of DIR monitoring, there's only a few, actually 3 school districts and 1 COE and the UC and CEU system that qualify. Another exemption is that the project is covered by a qualified project labor agreement. Or the project received funding from the Safe Drinking Water, Water Quality and Supply, Flood Control, River and Coastal Protection Bond Act of 2006. A long one there. So in this function, the prevailing wage monitoring, the DIR will be performing basically the similar functions that the LCP performed. Again, such as reviewing certified payroll records, conducting investigations, construction site visits, and interview workers. The DIR will also enforce any violations that they are found. Now, the funding is slightly different for each program. The LCP grant is based on a sliding scale, depending on the state funding provided for the project, while the prevailing wage monitoring grant is set at 1/4% of the total state share of the eligible project cost. Now, the grants for both programs are intended to be reasonable and directly related to the costs associated with performing specified monitoring enforcement services. So that's a very basic, high-level overview of DIR's involvement. We do take a look at certain documents to see if the district qualifies. This is usually done at the fund release stage for labor compliance programs. We take a look at contract documents. But if they're under the prevailing wage monitoring program, we just make sure that the districts have contacted DIR and that they initiated that process. Again, that's a very high-level overview of DIR's role. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
What?
Somebody from DIR?
I don't think they were available now.
My ongoing complaints about classification, but we'll pass.
All right, well, we'll move on to OPSC then.
I did. So do we have any information on how the process since January 1, 2012 has been going?
Going with us or with DT?
Well, they're not here, right? With DIR, right?
No. I think that there has been some questions raised, but we don't know specifically how it's worked, districts working with DIR directly. We get involved at the back end, just provide the funding once the districts have contacted DIR, but to get engaged with DIR, we don't know as far as how it's worked.
And is there a way that you are checking that they have started that process so that we don't, I mean, we heard a lot of appeals around this. the prior process.
Right.
Is there a way that we know that this is happening now, that we wouldn't have a back-end issue of someone didn't do the prevailing wage process?
Yeah, the districts do provide us a form that they have to submit to DAR to contact them for the prevailing wage monitoring. So basically that's certification to us that they are engaging in that process.
And you have that before the funds go out?
Yes.
Is that what? Okay. But we don't have any report on how it's working?
Not with DAR, no.
On OPSC?
Yeah, last but certainly not least, at least in our opinion, is OPSC. I know you're all familiar with who we are and what we do, but again, we are staffed through the State Allocation Board, and on behalf of the Director of DGS, we administer the School Facilities Program. There's various other things that we do, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of this detail. But I do want to highlight how we interact with other state agencies, which is on page 44. So depending on the type of project, certain projects do require plan approval. So for example, if we take a look at the new construction, a new construction project that typically acquires land, they will require, as we mentioned earlier, CDE site approval, as well as a plan approval. They also need DTSC determination on the site, and DSA plan approval. And at the end, they will also be required to have either the LCP or the prevailing wage monitoring documentation. So the way the process works is that school districts submit funding requests to our office, and we verify that they have received the appropriate approvals from all the other agencies. So again, when we get an application, it's considered to be construction ready. All the necessary plan approvals have been in place, and we have the certifications from each of the agencies that they have completed those reviews. And then, once we get that information, then we review the program criteria for the specific funding request. There's numerous programs that have various eligibility criteria that we check, and then we award the grants accordingly. Again, different criteria for different programs and different funding levels depending on the program type. Now, the current school facility program was designed to be a little bit more simpler than the old lease purchase program, which had a lot of state oversight. This program does have a lot of certifications that districts can make. In fact, there could be as much as about 60, or over 60, that they have to certify to when they apply for funding. And we have to have an attachment to list all the certifications. Now, they may not necessarily have to certify to all of them. It's just only as appropriate for the project. So a combination of the OPSC review and the district certification make the project eligible for funding under the current program, which right now they get an unfunded approval, then an apportionment, and eventually a fund release. Once we take a look at the application, review it, then we present it to the board, again, for an unfunded approval. We now have this semi-annual priority funding rounds where districts can submit certifications. They have to certify that they can submit a fund release within 90 days if they receive an apportionment to be able to participate. And then if they do get an apportionment, they have to qualify for an actual fund release. They have to submit a certification that they've entered into a contract for at least 50% of the work in the DSA approved plans, and that they have issued a notice to proceed. And again, at this stage is when we also review the prevailing wage monitoring requirements, whether it be through an LCP or DAR's involvement. We have a diagram that basically gets into the detail. I'm not going to walk through each step, but this basically it sets the milestones for each of the processes that we go through in-house, which generally starts with eligibility determination, then funding request, submittal, review, and approval. But once the project is approved and the district release funds, the school districts do have to provide annual expenditure reports, as well as one progress report 18 months after the fund release, basically to show that they've been moving towards completion of the project. Elementary school districts have to do this within 3 years, while middle and high schools have to be completed within 4 years. And then at the end, there is a final expenditure report, basically showing that the project is complete. We review these expenditure reports to make sure that they're in compliance. with the specifications and that all expenditures are eligible under the program. Some projects do have savings, and depending on the project type, they may be able to keep the savings and use it in our future capital outlay project, while other programs don't allow savings to be kept. Those programs are basically the Charter School Facility Program, Career Technical Education Program, Overcrowding Relief Grant Program, Facility Hardship and Seismic Mitigation Programs. Now, districts that are financial hardship districts, they must either return the savings to the state or use the savings to offset the financial hardship apportionment of a future project within 3 years. After the 3 years, any unused savings plus interest must be returned to the state. So that's a very high-level overview of how we get involved at the tail end, and again, a high-level overview of all the other agencies involved in the process. So that concludes our presentation.
Any questions? Are there any comments from anybody on the process?
And I once again, I'll just give credit.
If it's sit down at the mic, that's the only way we can record your comments.
I think again, thumbs up to you for CAPS. The complexity of the program that has been outlined for you, and the fact that districts apply for this program, even though there is not bonding authority, and that is happening, is an indicator of need. The point being that the arduous tasks that are there before a district that is seeking to apply for this program, going through the approval process with each of the agencies, as well as going through the CEQA process at the local level, and applying, as Juan said accurately, that they've applied with everything before they come in and submit an application.
But some of this they have to comply with whether they are participating in the program or not, correct?
That's correct. But if they show up at the door of OPSC with an application, it's an indication of need. My point is that you discussed earlier when you were talking about the PIW and how do we demonstrate need for a future bond. The fact that districts are doing that is an indication of need, because it's a lot of work to be done and you're spending local dollars. That's my comment. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Michelle Lowe with the Charter School Association. Not that I want to draw any more attention back to that Superfund thing, but I just want to say that highlights the hardships that charter schools face in finding facilities, and they have found this program to be particularly hard to navigate due to a lot of the same things as other school districts face. One thing we would suggest is maybe creating more guidance for small school districts or charter schools at the state level who are going through this process to be able to help guide them through agency and all the different steps. Other than that, they face just the same complexity that everyone else does, and the need is there as well, obviously.
So do you have any comments on whether or not, particularly, I'm going to focus just right now on DTSC, in terms of having that level of sign-off? I mean, certainly you can't speak for traditional schools, whether they participate in the program or they don't, but where do you stand on charter schools in terms of that particular point, ensuring that the site's not toxic? It seems to me if you don't have that assurance, and my kid develops cancer down the road, I'm going to come back and sue you. So it seems to me that it's a safety provision that should apply to all kids, but I just curious.
As an association, we actually did work with that member and encourage them not to house on that site due to the community that gets involved in it and just the PR that we create for them. We just kind of encourage them that they might lose enrollment being on a Superfund site. And, there's the idea of school safety, and obviously we want the schools to be safer for the kids. Charter schools face so many issues in finding facilities that are educationally appropriate, that they can afford, because they don't necessarily get public dollars depending on what type of facility they're in. And so some are forced to do things like this and maybe get an educated or a facility that's not meant for a school. Now, in those cases, they're leasing it. It won't actually go to the district. The lease would just end and it would cease to exist. And we are trying as an association to get them to find more long-term, educationally appropriate and safe facilities for the students.
So would you support requiring, if you are acquiring land or a new building, that there be some a DTSC sign off on the application before you build?
Before you build, yes.
Right.
If you're acquiring land and building, yes.
It's interesting that every agency touched on this particular project, and it started with a local advocate that found out about the issue, and they brought it to every agency's attention, and every agency said, we don't have jurisdiction, but we'll talk to them. And I think it was ultimately Department of Toxic Substance Control talking to them, the association talking to them, the Department of Ed talking to them, that they voluntarily went away from a decision that they seemed imminent to make. But it was not because they had to come to any of the entities. And it does highlight that, you know, for those that are state funded, we do a certain thing, and for those that aren't, it's local requirements only.
And they are public school students.
And it was odd that that the local entity didn't pick it up either. I mean, it was well on its way.
But there was no legal requirement. I mean,
well, they are legally required to have charters that are not state funded have a choice between going to the Division of State Architect or their local planning authority. So they had to have had a local planning authority sign off.
If I picked up correctly from the discussion today, there is no requirement that they approach DTSC and have a clearance letter. If they had, then I think that issue would have been raised. And so my question there is, particularly when we're talking about an environmental issue like that, should there be a sign-off, you know, somewhere by DTSC?
And I would also highlight that we think it's a problem that a charter school would have to pay to go through that review. If they're voluntarily going through that review, I think that's not an extra expense they should have to take on since they are public school students, that they're housing in that site.
And do regular schools have to pay for that?
Yes, you sign an agreement and they bill you hourly, basically.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? All righty, well, we have, thank you very much for all the time and work, and more than anything, I think we're building a wealth of information, so as we start to take all the items that we have on our list and start to condense them down into a coherent package for the next program, we'll we have a good base of knowledge here to make decisions. So
what's next? What's our next meeting?
Well, we're working on that. I think we're trying to clarify whether or not it's the 10th or the 11th. I think the 10th may create some logistical issues for some of our members coming in on Monday morning.
So in June?
Yes, in a couple weeks.
And do we have what we will be talking about at that meeting yet?
Some of the topics we were just discussing yesterday. So we'll be indexing that soon. Probably just to deny some of the parking lot issues. Is our focus.
Parking lot.
Yeah, all those.
I beg your pardon?
Someone wanted that repeated in the audience. So the meeting is scheduled for June 8th or 10th. We don't know yet. 10th or 11th. And the topics have not been determined yet, but Lisa said that it probably would be addressing some of the parking lot issues.
Correct. And we'll be indexing that
all the questions
in a few weeks.
Right? Do you want to consider this, or what about this?
All of issues.
Kurt Hagman, if we give you money to buy land and you sell it and you don't build a school, those kinds of issues. We have pages, we all have issues like that we've brought up, pages and pages of them in terms of what should constitute financial hardship, what should...
Well, can I make a suggestion? Obviously, there's interested parties in this room that may have additional questions we haven't brought up.
Right.
Can they email them to us? Or
absolutely, and some of those that they have brought up are on there as well.
Yeah.
So.
Do we have a parking lot issue document so we know what's
We're
on
in the
it?
process of creating and condensing because it was many, many pages, but when you started to go over it, you realized some of these issues that came up at multiple meetings overlapped, and so we've been working on creating a parking lot list, which you'll see that's by topic area, so that if it deals with eligibility, if it deals with funding, whatever, we're trying to condense them so we can have some, hopefully, like I say, some coherent discussions around all the areas that fall into, or all the topics that fall into specific areas.
And move forward with some
We'll share,
recommendations.
obviously, we'll share those with you, but we've got it.
Oh, yeah.
So. Okay, thank you very much.
We have a couple comments.
No, we already asked. So.